Ok, nós já estamos no YouTube. Eu posso passar o link se quiseres partilhar com alguém. Deixa-me ver se eu encontro aqui. Exatamente. O link é esse. Ok. Nós já estamos.
Uhum.
Ok, então se calhar começamos. Hello everyone, this is the second session of CMD Talks. So this session is organized in the context of the PhD program in computational media design. And today we have with us Catarina Lelis. And I'm looking for my notes. So Catarina Lelis holds an UG degree in design and an MA in innovation knowledge management and a PhD in sciences and technologies of communication. She began her professional experience in 1997 as a graphic designer. Whilst in industry, she co-founded a technology-based company, a publishing startup, and the Portuguese Association for Innovation and Creativity in Organizations. With her PhD project, she won the first edition of the Idea Puzzle Award. She won 2 entrepreneur contests, one of them leading her to an immersive program in Silicon Valley. And she was semi-finalist of MIT Portugal Innovation and Entrepreneurship Competition. As an academic, she spent 6 years in London, during which time she was an associate professor in brand design and innovation, and where she was awarded a teaching fellowship with her project, The Impact Plan. Currently, Catarina is a senior lecturer at the University of Aveiro, Department of Communication and Art in Portugal. Her research interests include brand design, smartness in visual identities, design literacy, and anticipation of impact. This bio is available at our website, ccdm.day.2c.pt. And without further ado, I will pass the floor to Catarina. At the end, we'll have some Q&A, so feel free to drop your questions in the YouTube chat and we'll pass them to Catarina. Catarina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, João. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being here with you. The context of this communication today is pretty much what you have on the screen. I'm going to delve into how can we anticipate impact and potentially design a better world, precisely by paying special attention to the forecasting of impact in the context of design projects. So where does that come from? It comes from my experience whilst I was in London as, just trying to move my slides and it wasn't working straightforwardly. As João mentioned, as per my bio, I was in London. I spent 6 years in academia. And the year in which I moved to the UK was 2016. It was the referendum year. It was basically when we got to know that the UK was going to leave according to the Brexit regulations. And it was also the year in which the United Nations launched the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals. And this was something that, as a course leader for a master's course on advertising, branding, and communication, so I was dealing a lot with students that were coming from many different backgrounds, design inclusive, but there was, mechanical engineers, there was biologists, there were philosophy people, communication theories, very hardcore theoretical people. So I was dealing with so many different backgrounds, and the only thing that they really had in common was this massive concern towards the non-existence of an alternative in terms of a planet where humans are expected to live. So the whole concern in terms of anticipating impacts really comes from this environment and from the very preoccupations that my students were bringing over to me on each class. More or less simultaneously, so around 2016, I joined this think tank, the Purpose Disruptors. The Purpose Disruptors was this group of professionals from the advertising industry. And it included people with, really established careers and very well-paid jobs. Heads of design, art directors, people with very top responsibilities in the creative industries, especially in the advertising and branding industry. And they were kind of concerned into how badly the advertising industry was contributing to the fact that our planet A, which is the one that we have, is being so badly affected by the numerous products and services that advertisers tend to sell to us every single day. So basically, they came to this moment in which they found themselves contributing to the selling of products and services that were leading to not necessarily a better place for us to be as humans. So they wanted to change this. And interestingly, these people who started Purpose Disruptors from the beginning, they were 4 or 5 people. They resigned from their jobs. So this was, as you can imagine, this was a massive decision. It was something like, what? Wait, what? Are these guys going to, leave their jobs and live from what and doing what, and what's going to be their income? But whilst we were asking why, it became clear during these sessions that unanimously their answer was, we're not into this just for the world. Above all, we're doing this for our children and their children. So to me, it became quite clear that there was not just an altruistic position towards we can save the world. Advertising sucks these days. We're not doing what should be done. We should be, using the powers of advertising and design to take us all to better places. But also because they had their own self-interest, and obviously because they had their own children that they wanted to look at and find better places for their loved ones. So there was this, both altruistic kind of orientation, but there was also an egoism kind of attitude associated to these big decisions. The interesting thing that comes from this experience is that in one of the sessions, at least one of the sessions, it became clear to me that there was this method of working which I was not familiar with until taking part of these meetings, which is the theory of change. And the theory of change is a method that basically explains or helps us explain and understand the why and the how a given intervention, a program, a design program, for example, is expected to lead to specific outcomes in the sense of, making change happen, in the sense that we can develop things in different terms into something that may be a better place for all of us. And to me, this was quite eye-opening. So we're at this, wonderful time in which there's lots of beautiful intentions coming from the United Nations with these massive, challenging goals, which, nobody really knows how we're going to attain them by 2030, which, by the way, is in 7 years' time, less than that. And even if we break down the SDGs into smaller bits, because each SDG is composed by different targets. So if you want to build your own operations around the SDGs, you can focus on specific targets instead of, the whole SDG which can be quite abstract and difficult to tackle. And to me, this was, very clear that an interesting framework for us to work with was design thinking. And this is particularly because it was something that was not an awkward place for me to be in terms of methodology, in terms of thinking, in terms of building the organizing our ideas and leading into the experimentation of something that might come up as a solution. And it entails, understanding the problem, getting to know the user, defining the problem by our own terms, and then we would have something that is very cherished by the branding and the advertising industry, which is all the creativity around a possible solution and coming up with prototypes in terms of campaigns and so on. And obviously the testing phase of it. So the thing that was particularly useful for my students was to work with canvases and the design thinking canvas, because, as we wanted to tackle problems which were sort of emanating from both the SDGs and the fact that we had an industry that was ill, that was not necessarily contributing to a better place, to a better world. The students really wanted to put their hands on coming up with solutions for these problems. And canvases work really well in terms of helping them structure their way of thinking. So the design thinking canvas is something that is more or less new. It's been around for a couple of years. And obviously, if you can look or concentrate on the center of this canvas, some of you will find that there are similarities with another framework, which is it's been proposed a few years ago by the Design Council in the UK, which is the double diamond. So the double diamond is this framework in which two diamonds, basically these two shapes, separate two main areas of intervention during a design process. And since we were using within the advertising and branding and communication context a design thinking approach, we should know exactly what was behind the design thinking canvas, namely since it was grounded on this double diamond model. So this model uses two diamonds to explain that part of a design project is going to focus on the problem, and that's going to be the left-hand diamond. And another part of the design process is going to focus on the solution, and that's the right-hand side diamond. Well, the diamond shape comes associated to the fact that if, I'm going to turn this way, if we start by thinking this in these terms, we will open up our perspectives. So we will be using divergent thinking, and that will allow us to discover the problem that we have in hands. And then once we gathered enough information, using different methods and resources, we will converge towards something that will allow us to define the problem that we have in hands by our own terms, which may differ, by the way, from the terms that have been the terms used by the client, for example. So towards the end of the first diamond, we will have insights that usually allow a creative team to come up with a creative brief, which is the brief that sets up the very beginnings of the next stage, which is a stage for ideation. So we will open up again in terms of divergent thinking. We will create, wonderful ideas. We'll have loads of workshops. We'll come up with our own prototypes. And then once we have something that may look like a solution, we will converge again in terms of our process towards something that may be a deliverable, something that we can hand over to our client and say, hey, this is a possible solution. So two diamonds, the problem space, and the solution space, both going through divergent and convergent thinking. First of all, we would discover, then we define, then we develop, and then we deliver. It's a D-based kind of language, but it made sense. It's been making a lot of sense. Now, again, this falls really, nicely within the framework of design thinking. If we think that we discover the context and the problem by understanding the user, that's going to fall more or less within the definition of what the empathize phase should look like. And then the define moment of the double diamond would coincide with the define stage of the design thinking framework proposed by the D School in Palo Alto, Stanford. And then we would, have time for ideation, create our prototypes. That's the divergent thinking again, and then we would converge into some testing. It kind of aligns very nicely with the design thinking. So it makes sense that there is a canvas, a design thinking canvas, which is based on the double diamond. What I found from my practice, by looking at the students, by observing them work, and by having these moments with the advertising people, is that when we look at things from this perspective, there's a lot of investment into how we're going to be doing things, how we will be approaching the user, how are we going to define the problem, and then on the what. So how is this exactly a problem, and what kind of solution can we get, to possibly tackle this problem? And what I found is that there hasn't been enough space for understanding the why. So basically what I started doing with my students was to, before we get our hands into the design thinking, whatever, and before we start, talking in terms of design related approach, let's give some time for us to understand why we want to tackle this problem. Why is this problem relevant? How is this going to cross my own world? Where is the relevance of this problem in terms of altruistic views, and what's the relevance of this problem in terms of my own self-interest? So what I'm calling here is what I'm saying basically is that there is a space which goes beyond the problem space and the solution space, which has been proposed by the double diamond. And there's this space, which is the space for, challenge and call to adventure, which is, when we realize that there is something big going on, a wicked, ugly, complex thing that may, go through lots of different nuances, and we need to find the best nuance for us to tackle it, according to our competencies, according to our motivations, according to our self-interest, according to our views of the world, and so on. So this takes me back to the design thinking canvas and my exercises around this canvas with the students. And to me, it was very obvious that the students were immediately going into the center of this canvas because they were focusing on the problem. And many of the students would start immediately by looking into the solution without really giving enough time to understand the problem. And what I did was I decided that we would need more time around the challenge. We would need more time around all these circumventing, the boxes around the main area of the design thinking canvas, which is the main area is the double diamond framework. When we look into the challenge, when we give space to our students to think in terms of a design challenge, they find themselves in a really wobbly moment. It's the, in management terms, it's the fuzzy front end, where, things can turn out to have many different facets and possibilities. In terms of approaching a challenge, the challenge can be approached from so many different angles that each angle will possibly have have one specific kind of user, one specific kind of beneficiary, and they may all differ, right? So you cannot step into, empathizing with the user and understanding the user and doing your user research until you find the nuance of the problem that you want to tackle, because that nuance will have beneficiary or a user or a client or a customer that may differ from the other nuance. Both nuances within the same challenge, but they will be different, okay? And the context may be different. So challenges are these big things, like, saving water. We can save water in domestic context. We can save water in academic, at university. We can save water in industry. We can save water in many different contexts, in many different ways. Even within the domestic context, we can tackle different users. It can be adolescents. It can be, the adults at home, just because they have different frameworks and different understandings of what means to, save water. So when we pay a lot of attention to the challenge, and when we try to understand why we're going to be looking into the challenge in many different ways so that we can pick the right one for us, we can establish a really, obvious line between, what we have in hands, which is something that is complex to solve, and the anticipated impacts that we would like to have. So it's based on speculation, which is good because we don't want to think in terms of solutions at this moment, but it opens up a room for forecasting and foreseeing the future. Not necessarily, it's not a crystal ball kind of thing, but it's in terms of projecting what we know, what we have in our hands into something that may be the probable and the most likely future if things advance according to plan. So what I was basically doing was inviting the students to focus on the challenge, leave the problem, leave the solution for later. That's not something that we're going to be doing now. We need to find the best possible facet of the challenge so that we can actually speak in terms of what may end up being the impacts that we want to have. So I call this the determined stage. If we bring this together to the double diamond framework, we still have that framework resolving a lot of, or at least explaining the process of design very well, but there's something happening before which has not been accounted. And that's the moment in which you determine the why you want to tackle this challenge and why you're going to be moving towards this facet of a challenge in particular. So again, if we go back to the challenge saving water, which is one of the SDGs, if you pick one of the targets, you are picking one of the possible nuances of that SDG. If you pick one of those targets and you bring that target into a specific geographical context, you're going to be looking into that target in a very specific context with very specific users. And that will lead to a solution that may differ from, looking into that target within this big challenge at a different geography, because the users will be different, because culture will be different, because the understanding of how precious water is will be different. So once you need to identify the users that you're going to research, you will know that you will be looking into different views of how precious water is. It really depends on the users that you will be using for your study and the users that will be representing the main beneficiaries towards the end. So basically, my idea is that once we pick the right facet of a challenge, once we know, okay, I'm going to find how to save water in a domestic setting in Eastern Europe, that's going to help us in terms of understanding who the users are, what kind of needs they have, what kind of priorities will be driving them, which will be possibly different from those that are the users in Europe as well, but in Western Europe. They will have different needs. They will have different approaches to how they are understanding the need to save water. And if you move from, the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, you will find that the differences will be much bigger. So this is quite obvious. The moment in which I want my students to find the right project for them is the moment in which they find that the nuance that they want to tackle, the geography, the context, the kind of users, and so on, is going to lead them into a project that is, going to represent some pleasurable moments for them. It's going to lead to meaningful outcomes, and it's going to have some kind of impact. And I see these conditions, these dimensions, as something that is intrinsically connected to what I just mentioned a few moments ago, which has to do with being egoist and altruist in terms of how we approach a problem. So the pleasurability, or the pleasureness, if you want, the pleasure of a project has to do with what's in it for me, okay? When we tackle a design project, we have to find ourselves in a pleasurable space, in something that we can foresee it's going to lead into something positive for our own being. And towards the opposite, we would be looking into the impactfulness of our projects when we think in terms of the others. So what's in it for the others? How is this going to contribute to the common good, for example? How is this going to contribute to the larger society? Within this moment, which comes prior to the frameworks that we've looked at, there is a couple of principles. So to the designers, which are usually my students, the first principle is that the value, which is the why, is the best known variable. This is what this is their point of departure. This is where they're departing into, starting to look into the project. They will know why they want to tackle this project, and that will help them in understanding how they're going to tackle it. And only by knowing how they're going to tackle it, they will potentially find a possible solution. So this is very much inspired by the Golden Circle, which has been proposed by Simon Sinek. Some of you may know. His most famous book is Start With Why. And basically he says that, the connection to the limbic brain is very much attached to our need to find purpose and a reason for being and a reason for acting. So when we find the reason behind choosing a specific nuance within a bigger challenge, we find ourselves the answer to what's in it for me. And that means I know the why for me, okay? But I will know the why as well for the others. Why is it relevant for the others? Why is this problem relevant to the wider community? The second principle is that the value, which is again the why, describes the purpose, which is attached to the intended impact that I want to have. So my purpose is to increase, for example, again, attached to SDG, saving water. My purpose is to increase the quality of life of children in Africa, and I'm not going to go into the specifics of Africa. So that may be something that drives me, okay? And I'm answering to the why in terms of my the relevance of a challenge that I want to tackle. I'm driven towards, increasing the quality of life of children in Africa. Actually, I've been volunteering with these kind of causes in recent years, and there's lots of people doing that. So that value, knowing the why, really helps us describing our purpose, which is going to be somehow connected to the intended impact. If my purpose is to, increase the quality of life of children in Africa, the intended impact is that, in Africa, all children without differentiation should have increased quality of life. That's the impact, the expected impact that we want to get. It also informs the rationale for taking up a project or activity. So in many cases, designers have to justify the reason why they picked this project. Why are you getting involved with this project in particular? And once you know the why, you have a very strong justification. It's a motivation, it's a purpose. It can be very personal, but it can be so personal that it's going to have some, beautiful impact around the world. And it also is the center of the designer speculative process. So once we start, creating narratives and scenarios, looking into the future and how this, tackling this challenge from this facet and not another, how is this going to have some positive impact? Once we start thinking in terms of the impact we want to have, we're going to project ourselves into a moment which is, far at a future, and usually we have to come back. So there's going to be a backcasting exercise from the desired situation, which is the one in which things get really impactful, towards the moment in which we are today and which we need to take action. So what I knew was that, we needed to understand and know the why. That meant giving time to understand the purpose. I knew that in terms of creating personas for my framework to work, I knew that there will be the pleasure of the self-interest side of things, but also the impact of the altruistic attitudes. And in the middle of it, there's going to be something that has to be somehow meaningful. And then I knew that I wanted to make sure that whatever tools that I was going to help my students use would take them into forecasting, looking into the future, into something that is not necessarily a utopian future, not necessarily a dystopian one, but something that is the preferable future, the most probable one. Again, given the conditions that we have today, given the technologies that we expect to work with in the in the next couple of years. As in terms of helping them find the purpose, one of the things that I did was looking into the tradition of communities and cultures that have been relying a lot on understanding purpose and the reason of being. The Japanese are absolutely extraordinary in this kind of thinking, and they have established the ikigai, which is a practice. Ikigai basically means reason for being. And one of the things that I built for my students to work with was this exercise, which in which they find the crossover or the overlaps between things that will help them understand what's their passion, their profession, their vocation, and their mission. Once they can understand passions, professions, vocations, and missions, they know their ikigai. They are expected to find their reason for being. And they will find their passion by, overlapping what they love and what they're good at. They will find their profession by overlapping what they're good at and what the things that they can be paid for. They will find vocations when they can recognize that some things that they can be paid for can overlap with what the world needs, and they will find a mission when they overlap what the world needs and what they love to do. In terms of dealing with, you know, the needs of the personas involved in a design project, I found myself with two different personas. So I decided that I have to tackle the self-interest bit, because that's what drives us from, you know, from a very intrinsic kind of motivation. But there's also humanity, and we're all part of humanity. And either you have children or not, we all have connections with people that will stay after we had our time in this planet. So we should be looking into ways of guaranteeing that you know, our species can be taken forward. So the altruistic version of our, you know, ways of thinking and positioning and finding our whys would be associated to our concerns towards humanity. And when we look into humanity, we would be foreseeing the impact in terms of economic, environmental, and social dimensions, which are the three dimensions that define sustainability. When we look into the egoism perspective, the self-interest, the selfish side of things, we will be looking into us, you know, we, the heroes that will be solving the problem and finding a solution, we, the designers. And that means that we want to make sure that the learning process around which I will be, you know, engaged with this design project, and even if we are in practice, not, you know, necessarily students, we are always going through learning when we are in our own practice in industry. That process, which is very personal, needs to lead to some kind of pleasurable moments. And the meaningfulness I found from, you know, observing my students and talking to them, that they see the meaningfulness of a design project when they can see that there is a connection, an obvious connection between what they do during their courses and what they are expected to do once they finish their courses and find a job. So there is this, you know, very thin line between, you know, engaging with the project, finding yourselves into seeing that this is going to have some kind of relevance to me, and what's going to come next after I finish, after I graduate, which is hopefully find a job in industry. And in terms of the future, you know, I developed loads of exercises with the students. Many of them are, you know, scenario creation exercises, which, you know, are pretty common. You know, the evolution case is the traditional scenario, but then we would go a little bit wilder into alternative scenarios, exception cases. What if you are abducted by a team of aliens, you know, and they are not gonna, you know, let you go anyhow? What do you do? So this led me to the creation of this tool, which is a canvas that is to be used prior to any other canvas, namely design thinking canvas. And this is the canvas in which the students are necessarily facing the difficulty of choosing a new ones within a challenge that they are given. So let's save water. Saving water is such a big challenge. How can we save water? We can save water in many different ways. So when the students start, you know, breaking the challenge down into actionable problems, which they can move on into a design process, they find themselves with loads of different possible projects. And to some extent, there was a moment in which the students would come to me with 25 different possibilities in terms of projects. And I was like, whoa, okay, hold on. You need to, you know, pick a few, and you want to work on just one because you won't have the time. So what I was asking them, let's pick 3 and let's assess them and try and find which one is the one that possibly has the highest impact, and let's look into impact from your personal perspective. How is this project going to impact you on a personal level? How is this going to impact you on a personal level during your learning experience as a student, and also on you as a professional in the next 2 or 3 years? And then what's the impact that this project will have on the others? Let's go into a longer future. Let's think in terms of long-term impacts and what's going to be the impact that this project may have on humanity. And you would have to find that each one of these projects that you're going to be assessing will have some kind of connections with the economic dimension, with the environmental dimension, and with the social dimension. And that was it. And I was handing over this canvas, and I still do, to my students. And they start, bringing some motivations, some stimuli, some prompts, questions, other problems into these boxes, into each one of these contexts of scenario. Now, the problem that I found was that some students would come to me saying, hey, you know what? None of my projects is going to have economic impact. I can't find anything that has to do with economics. Possibly because they were not really, familiar with what economics mean. And they thought, this is not my area of comfort, so I'm not going to look into that. They could think in terms of environmental stuff, because it's something that has been around us for so many years. Let's not go very far from having a recycle bin at home. That is going to be somehow a contribution to the environment. And then the social causes, which, affect many of us still because of the stereotypes, because, not seeing the difference, not accepting that, diversity, is something that needs to be tackled and considered. So they're very, those are very easy to find. The economic was really something that the students wouldn't go for. So they would come to me and say, there is no economic impact on none of the projects that I selected, or the possible projects that I might select. And I was like, whoa, how is that? So what I did was I brought down the SDGs into each one of these sustainability dimensions. And this helps the students in understanding how the economic dimension is somehow related to, for example, health and well-being, which it wasn't obvious for the students from, very young ages. They do struggle to find these connections. The ramifications of all these things are not clearly seen by many students. The other thing that I did, and this is purely optional. Okay, so I talked about this already. They would bring up to 3 ideas into these boxes at the top. There's persona, the hero, which is the designer, the person, the students, and persona humanity. And they would have to find, to some extent, the pleasurability of the projects, the meaningfulness, and the impactfulness of these projects. And the assessment would be done by, finding which one would have the highest level of prompts or motivations, or, things that would pop in their minds. But what I did as an option, and this is what I was going into, was I developed this deck of cards which allow the students to assess in a more precise way and in, a very granular kind of way, the impact of, if they had 3 projects, the 3 projects in parallel. And then you can see that there are 3 columns in each one of the cards with those little squares. So each column represents one of the possible projects that the students would like to tackle. And they would go into each one of the prompts on each one of the cards, and optionally, again, and they would look into how each one of these prompts would impact each one of the topics that they are considering. And they would do this by using something like a Likert scale, which would range from -2, which would be very negative impact, to -1, which is negative impact, 0 for neutral, 1 for positive impact, and 2 for very positive impact. And again, the SDGs would still be on the cards to help them support in terms of, okay, well, this project may have impact on this SDG. There's going to be, lots of SDGs, number 6 being, ticked. So that's one of the SDGs that probably I won't be moving away from it. And this ended up by taking students into things like this. So they would, instead of writing on the canvas, they would assess using they would assess impact on things such as, for example, within learning, things that they can develop, the what's in it for me. How is this project going to impact your effective communication skills in terms of, for example, improving active listening skills? And they would, assess if that would be the case of project A, B, or C having some kind of impact, negative or positive, on that particular prompt. Okay, it's time consuming, but the students were coming to realize things that they never thought could exist. And, I departed from just a couple of cards, but then things evolved, and within the learning experience, because they wanted to guarantee that, working in groups, particularly when they are involved in teamwork, working in groups can be so difficult. We do want to make sure that we're going to have some pleasurable moments within the project. So there were lots of cards, new cards appearing. And if the beginning they were mostly around skills, towards the end, 2 or 3 cards came up on the well-being of students. So how is this going to contribute to, for example, you spending less time with your family on the weekend? Because the projects may, implicate that you have to gather with your team over the weekend because all of you are working and your schedules are not compatible. So the weekend is a very good option for you to meet and to work together. But that means you will be spending less time with your girlfriend or boyfriend or family or walking the dog and so on. So just to give you a quick overview of how this worked, I prepared this tool for something that was expected to work on a very hands-on kind of way of doing things, with a canvas on the wall, and the students cutting out the cards and gluing them. And some of the students would cut the prompts, just these little stripes from the cards, and they would pin them on the canvas. And then COVID hit. So we had to go fully remote. The students really didn't have how to print the canvas. But I'm happy to say that the tool is so flexible that the students, by resorting to the color coding, they could make it work. Nevertheless, it wasn't an impediment for things to happen. Some of the students, things evolved during COVID, so I prepared a mural version of the impact plan, and the students were doing this completely remotely. Mural is a Miro board kind of thing. It's the competitor of Miro, if you want. I know that Miro is way more popular than Mural, and they were just following the instructions, which you can see on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, and they were pinning the assessing the projects as per the impacts that they were anticipating on each one of them. And they were using numbers, but I was constantly telling them, if you want to use emojis or smiley faces or stars, it works for me. You don't have to resort to numbers. If you don't like the -2 Likert scale that I suggest, use any other way of assessing, because any other way is as good as numbers. And actually, numbers are just numbers. So use your gut feeling too. Multimedia students do like to do things in Figma, so they transported the whole impact plan into Figma And they've done it to find what challenge they would tackle. This year, I can tell you that the partner of our challenge-based learning was Bosch, and the challenge was increase the awareness towards thermotechnology. That was it. So this was quite broad, and then the students had to find the nuances within this big challenge. And the nuances was, for example, increasing the awareness towards energy efficiency in the setting of sharing a house, you know, because many of them do share houses and the bills are really hard to split. Increasing awareness towards energy efficiency in a care home center for elderly, increasing thermotechnology efficiency in a shopping mall. Each one of these contexts is a very specific one with very specific problems, with very specific users. And each one of these problems is attached to that very same challenge. And when they started to see that there were so many different possibilities, they couldn't find, they couldn't, you know, make up their minds. So they brought the different contexts onto this tool, and they assessed the anticipated impacts, and they chose the one that would, you know, possibly lead to higher impact on their specific cases, there as a team. These are engineering students. They like Excel, but it works for me as well. I'm fine with that. It's brilliant because they color coded it and it works for them. And yeah, I mean, this is just to give you an overview of a design process from the very beginning, from when you start the challenge or the adventure, if you want, until you find a solution. And at the time in which the solution may end up being, for example, a business solution, and it may lead to a startup, for example. So what this diagram shows, although I'm not expecting you to read it in full, is to basically show you that the two frameworks, the double diamond and the design thinking, which you can read on the top left, do start at a time that coincides with finding the how. And if we use another framework, which is the hero's journey, which is the storytelling narrative framework, it coincides with the growing from adversities. So you want to grow from adversities when you start understanding who the user is. But there is a moment prior to that, which is, you know, when you initiate the journey, when you get the call to the adventure, and you need to find exactly what are the terms of the adventure. And that's when you need to understand the why. And that's why I called it the determined stage, which is not considered within the double diamond framework, nor within the design thinking model as, you know, as an approach to work through design. And the impact plan, the tool that I suggest, that I created for my students, happens on those. I don't know if you can see my mouse. You can see my mouse. So those, each one of these circles with a Swiss knife is a tool that is usually used within this moment of the process. And those with the colors are the impact plan. So it tends to be used within the very beginning of a project, usually coinciding with the determined stage. But then I found that the students use it as well towards the end on this stage, which is when they revisit the impact plan to define what are the metrics that they are going to use to monitor impact. So when they are asked in terms of KPIs, which is something that, you know, designers also have to do at some stage, what are going to be the metrics that you're going to use to monitor the success of your solution? They revisit the impact plan, they revisit the prompts that they had to go through, and many of them bring some of those that were having the highest levels of impact, those that were scoring +2, onto metrics that they would like to use to monitor the success of their solutions. So yeah, this is just a zoom in on that diagram. These are a couple of questions that I asked the students to ask themselves as teams as as they progress, and all the tools that usually they go through and they may use within a big toolkit that is usually available to them. This led to a book, which this is my moment of little self-promotion, which I'm very happy to say it's been endorsed by Don Norman, which possibly many of you will know. There's a website as well where you can download the canvas, where you can download the cards, where you can download a few exercises as well. So there are materials available on this website in case you're interested. And yeah, this is me. I think I didn't go through the 45 minutes. I'm really sorry about that, but yeah, I think we still have a few moments for questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I didn't stop you because it was such a enlightening presentation for me. I think you have a lot of material that is very useful for I would say many audiences. I'm looking into what we have here at the department, starting from students to researchers and people going into the industry. I think this that you have showed here, it's very useful. And I have to say, I have to be honest on this. I did my course also here in Coimbra, and at the time we did not go into these sort of methodologies for development because they were just not much used at the time, right? And right now, I think what you present here is of much use to students. And we have Sergio also here. So I think Sergio also have a couple of questions. I can start with one, which is, what's the feedback from students? You mentioned many students, you mentioned design students, you mentioned engineer students, and I could also see the names. These were probably international students. So I'm guessing that you're getting a lot of feedback, right? And also maybe you have already results to show in terms of projects that also went into the industry. And you mentioned getting a startup up. So I'm very curious first on the feedback, and then second, are these two? I imagine it's very useful. Do you get results already?
Okay, so as for the first question, the feedback is quite polarized. So I'm going to be very honest. Some of the students find, because they like to have results quite quickly, they find that because the tool involves thinking and it involves, finding yourself, which is something that many students, particularly younger students from undergraduate courses, are not really into. They find it very time consuming. And the fact that it's time consuming is a no-go. It's almost like a deal breaker. Now, the best results that I have is with students on postgraduate courses, not necessarily during the taught year, but on the year of their project, their final projects, and particularly PhD students. So the most interesting feedback that I got was that I used a PhD student who used it before. It used the tool again towards the end to assess the actual impact of her project. It was a student from the University of Porto. And then she came to me a few weeks after defending her Viva, saying that she had given up from all the hobbies that she had prior to engaging with the PhD. And now she was, in a void and she didn't know what to do. So she needed to find a new hobby. And she asked me, can I use the impact plan to find my hobby? Because, I could do this and I could do that and I could do that. And I was like, well, nobody ever asked me that, but why not? I mean, why not? So we went through the impact plan for her to find that she was going to pet sit, basically. Now, in terms of the master's projects, is another interesting context, because the students find that they, when they start planning the project, once they get a feeling of how impactful their project, which is going to be a project that is going to drain them, to many of them is going to be draining them for months. When they see the light towards the end of the tunnel, just based on the fact that it's going to have some impact, positive one, they see this as a very helpful instrument. And I've been told by some students at master's level, I should have understood the potential of this tool prior to arriving to the masters. I'm really sorry that it didn't make sense to me at an earlier stage. But it's not an easy one with younger students. I'm totally aware of that. It would have to have, I think, a simplified version, I think. As for the other question, which was, sorry, can you repeat that?
I mean, it had to do with palpable results, right? So people go through your tool to actually identify the purpose and actually find out how they can actually come up with a project and how to develop it. And so my question was, okay, if they did go and use the tool to actually come up with an idea, how successful was it, right? In terms of implementation, do you have success examples of people who actually implemented it?
Yeah,
all of them.
All of them. Whilst I was in the UK, all of them had to have a creative strategic output, because it was towards the verge of something that would be a mix of design and marketing. They would have to have a strategic / creative solution, and all of them would lead to an output that basically they could, hand over to someone during a job interview. Hey, this is what I did during my master's. They would take these results with, such proudness, and, it was really their babies. And the whole thing just made sense because they could argue, they could justify all the decisions that they had been making throughout the process, based not just on their own purpose, because they knew why they were doing that, but because there was a well-researched group of people, users, clients, customers, patients, whatever, that would benefit from that solution. And that was very gratifying. It was very, very, very good to see that it was helping the students turn out to have some palpable and meaningful stuff that they could, use to position themselves within a very specific industry. I want to work in advertising, but I want to work exclusively for hospitals. I had people like that. So they would focus on understanding patients. Dementia, it was a huge topic. So I had lots of students working on campaigning around dementia. It was really interesting. That was giving them a lot of focus. So yeah.
I have another question which concerns, so I'm guessing that you are using this tool mostly in your classes, right? And my question is, do you ever give workshops, or would that make sense for you to actually give workshops on this tool? I don't know, a 1 week workshop in which students really need to do this quick work and try to use the tool to actually come up with a project. Do you do this, or is it something that makes sense?
Yes, I have well, not exactly with someone else's students. What I have been doing, particularly here at the University of Aveiro, is I've been visiting some classes with the students, and obviously the lectures had already been exposed to the tool. They know what's going to happen. They had a very quick taster with me, usually a 2-hour taster. And usually what happens is when I go to their class, the students have already a couple of challenges that have been broken down into actionable problems. And then I help them identify the problems that they are going to use by, using the tool. And it's something that is, again, is very time consuming. So I've only been doing this at postgraduate level, master's level. So I've done this with masters in biology, marketing, entrepreneurial, international entrepreneurship. I've done this with the graduate school, and I've got another session with the health department in a couple of weeks. I'm going to deliver a workshop to Portucalense next week just for the lectures. We'll see what comes next.
But the workshops is only with the students or lecturers from a field, or it's a a group of planning people from different fields, for instance.
Well, at master's level, you can always get people from different areas of expertise. I can tell you that on the session of the biology students, the module, the name of the module was Blue Biotechnology. It's got a beautiful name. And most of them were biologists, but there was a designer who had picked that module as an option. So, don't ask me why I didn't have the time to explore that, but sometimes you get a wild card, even in these very expectedly precise contexts. In the area in which I teach, which is multimedia communication, you get people from journalism, design, multimedia communications, computer science, electronics. I mean, then you get quite a wide range of students with very different backgrounds. And it's interesting to see how differently they see the world. And this is the interesting moment of looking into those cards, the sustainability-oriented cards, which are the environmental, the social, and the economic cards. When they start discussing each one of the prompts, they have so many different views of the world that only that discussion is kind of building their understanding of how different we are. And that is really an enriching moment. I just wish we could have more time for these sessions. Unfortunately, we don't have, because the projects need to evolve and there are other modules coming along the way. But the students do see the value of having these discussions and seeing that, you know what, if we don't resolve these divergences now at the beginning, there's going to be some problems as a group in the future. So they can see that there is a value attached to that. And that's very good.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now 12 minutes past the supposed time of closing. I think in any case, I think it's very interesting to have these conversations, and I really don't mind going a bit beyond time. I hope that for you, Catarina, was not also an issue.
Yeah, not at all.
Very great conversation, at least for me. So we now will close this session. So I hope that you all enjoyed, and I just want to share next week speakers. So just give me a second. Okay, it will be the 17th. All right, so next week it will be a session of CCDM, so Ciclo de Conversas Design and Multimedia, which is organized in the context of our bachelor and master's design courses in design and multimedia. And next week it will be at the same time, Wednesday at 5, and we'll have Susana Carvalho and Kuiperno. Feel free to register and attend. It will be a very interesting talk as well. And I will now stop the stream, I'll ask that Catarina still stay for a bit so that we can say goodbyes. We say thank you again for joining us. It was a very interesting talk, and I hope that the people at home and watching us on YouTube also enjoyed the talk. And yeah, see you next week.